In previous blog posts and videos, I encouraged others to try to find a balance between different personal and professional responsibilities while also finding some breathing space. However, I wasn't that successful in finding the right balance in my own life. I failed to practice what I preached. Deadlines, feedback, and numbers supposedly assigned to value and acclaim occupied a far too high position in my own life. However, after some challenging times, I decided to focus on something a bit simpler and allow myself to just be for a while. A few years ago, a friend of mine was trying to convince me to go with them on a walking holiday. This was back when I was very cynical about a holiday that was centered around exercising and instead would prefer to sit down on a beach with a book, hoping seagulls wouldn't steal my lunch. I usually limited myself to a flat countryside wander with my dog when I was home from university. I wouldn't exactly take in my surroundings as I was too preoccupied with grades, life goals, and how I compared with my peers. However, a sharp change in perspective was prompted by the sudden loss of individuals very dear to me in close succession. I won't go into detail about grief for this. This is meant to be an overall positive message. I'll only say that I've realised it's not a uniform process and everyone deals with the emotional contortion in their own way. The immediate instinctual reaction I initially adopted was to launch myself back into work as soon as possible. However, this wasn't the healthiest approach. Just over 2 years ago, another friend of mine contacted me for a catch-up, and he told me that he was starting to visit and climb all these different mountains around the country. He sold me the idea that it was a very rewarding pastime, and because it challenged you physically, and by overcoming the initial difficulties, you would feel a great sense of achievement. He also told me about the social side, and how there was a great sense of camaraderie, which translates into words of encouragement when you're halfway up a mountain and the car park seems so much closer than the summit. I've also told myself that the pub will still be there when you're done a few times. I was convinced to give it a go, and I started with a relatively small mountain with an elevation of approximately 400 metres. This was during the early summer, prior to a recent heat wave, and although it was reasonably cool, my aerobic fitness wasn't exactly on par. I also made some questionable choices with regards to footwear, which culminated in the formation of blisters on my feet. However, I remember looking around at the landscape at the summit, and for the first time in a long while, I was able to just take everything in and just be. About 2.5 years have now passed, and since then I have climbed a further 10 mountains of increasing elevation, as I'm fortunate enough to live within 1 to 2 hours drive of some extraordinary routes. I've also ventured out in various weather conditions and realised that I prefer a bit of rain as a natural cooling system. I've invested in a better pair of boots to minimise the risk of blistering and lost weight, which has helped with the pace I cover the routes. Although I'm not exactly a fell runner. Yet. I've also met some wonderful people of all ages, and I have started to grow in confidence again. I'll finish with some of the things I've learnt over the past few years while climbing rocky inclines. It's better to walk with someone else, as you can motivate each other and it's safer. If you are going to walk alone, be sure of the route you're going to take. Tell someone where you're going, have a suitably charged phone, and try to avoid days of unpredictable weather. The importance of the correct footwear cannot be understated. In addition to the blisters, I've also had a few warning stumbles that almost ended in ankle issues. The pair of walking boots I now own will hopefully provide enough ankle support and minimise the risk of slipping on challenging terrain. Lastly, just give it a go. And if you must turn back on some days, don't be too disappointed. You can try again another day. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll enjoy the countryside as much as I do.